The wars of conquest and the incredible wealth brought in by them not only brought this increase of slavery, but it also brought in rising inequity between rich and poor in Rome. The plebeians who went out and did the fighting in the wars, who did the dying in the wars, would return home to find that the generals, the patricians, had gotten much, much wealthier than they had. And the massive influx of slave labor had made it much harder for free Romans to compete. Businesses failed, farms went under, and misery tended to increase even while Rome was getting richer as a whole. The rich got richer much, much faster than the poor. And this brought rising conflict within the society. Fairly soon, this begins to break down not simply along patrician plebeian lines, but between basically two political parties. The oculares, who represent the people, the ordinary Romans proclaimed to, and the optimates, who represent the better sorts. In general, the optimates wanted the Senate and the senators to have full control over the society, while the populares wanted something more equitable, where the rich were not quite so all powerful. There were senators on both sides, plebeians on both sides. These are closer to political parties of the Democrat-Republican type than they are to classes. Now, not long after that final victory over Carthage, a man, Tiberius Gracchus, is a tribune, a leader of the plebeians, and he is able to push legislation through the assembly, overriding the Senate, to begin breaking up some of the huge estates that had been created by patricians buying out and forcing plebeians out of farming. These new lands are given to Roman farmers, Roman poor, so that they have a chance to become middle class. Each farm that they would give would be 40 acres, a number that will occur in later times. Now, Tiberius Gracchus is assassinated within a year by representatives of the other party, as fear that he is going to take away the power of the wealthiest senators, becomes more general. His brother, Marcus Gracchus, will continue his program, set up more colonies for the poor, and perhaps even more radically, he begins a program where citizens of Rome, resident in Rome, will be able to get a limited amount of bread, olive oil, wine, later pork, from the government, distributed for free. And this free food, mostly bread, is provided by taxes paid by the North Africans, that is the former Carthaginian territory. It is a step towards socialism for the poor of Rome. It is not necessarily that for the people in North Africa. Now, he too is assassinated. However, the conflict between the two parties doesn't go away. The next leader of the Populares is a guy named Marius. Marius reforms the Roman army. He makes it easier for poor Romans who have nothing to rise up within the Roman army. He will set up the classic system of the Roman legions, about 5,000 soldiers each, that will last for the next 500 or 600 years. When a Roman citizen joins the army, he is expected to serve for 16 years. After 16 years of military service, he receives land, about 16 acres, 40 acres, in one of the new Roman colonies being set up throughout the growing area. These cities will have as their local upper class these veterans of Roman wars. And these new towns will be Latin-speaking settlements. They will be especially common in the areas of Spain, France, and North Africa. Many of them will give rise to the people who will spread Latin and make it the common language throughout many of these areas. Now, Marius, too, meets a lot of pushback from the wealthy, but he remains sort of the strong man of Roman politics for about 20 years. He does this by, among other things, he's the person who conquers the kingdom of Numidia. He defeats the first German barbarian invasion of Italy. It saves the city with his new model of an army, with the legions. And he finally retires because he seems to have had some kind of mental breakdown. He's probably schizophrenic because he spends the last years of his life living on the streets where he would attack people who he claimed were out to get him, or that the voices in his head had told him he should attack. Of course, he was a large, powerful man, and it would be sort of like, you can imagine an American politician who was of the first rank, maybe George W. Bush or Barack Obama, is now homeless, living in the park and attacking people. I mean, this would have been a very sad sight for the people who had supported him during his career. Now, at the end of Marius's period of dominance, the Italian cities allied with Rome rose up in rebellion, demanding greater rights within the Roman system. They're defeated by Marius and his chief lieutenant, a man named Sulla, in what's called the Social War. And the result of the Social War is all Italians become Roman citizens. All the Italian cities cease to be independent, even on paper, and are simply a part of Rome. Roman citizenship is expanded vastly. Now it is all Italians plus those from Rome itself living outside of Italy. Now, Sulla, Marius' lieutenant, he seizes power after Marius has his breakdown. He is made dictator of office in the Roman Republic, where in times of crisis, one person can be given full authority by the Senate to do as they would like for a 6-month period. During that 6-month period, he executes, I believe, 2,600 people he perceives as political opponents. Initially, he had been with the Populares, but once he is in full power, he reverses many of the reforms that Marius and the Gracchi brothers had done earlier to the benefit of the wealthy. Finally, he retires with Metrovius, his boyfriend, after about a decade of dominance over Rome. And conflict continues. More generals, rich people are struggling to have power over the state. The conflict with Spartacus happens. As you may remember, there were 2 men, private citizens, who organized an army against Spartacus. At the same time, Roman power is advancing across the Mediterranean. Conflicts are getting worse at home between rival generals. To stop them, 3 men, those two, Crassus and Pompey, and a third, establish an alliance so that they can resist the rule of the Senate and do as they would wish. First of them is Pompey. Pompey will go to the eastern Mediterranean. He will turn the last part of the Seleucid Empire into a Roman province of Syria. He reforms and settles all the conflicts of the eastern Mediterranean. He sets up a family called the family of King Herod to rule in Judea, and is generally seen as quite successful. Crassus been brought in by the other two, not because he was a great general or a great politician, but because he was by far the richest man in Rome. Crassus had become rich because he owned much of the city, especially apartment blocks in which most ordinary Romans lived. He cheaply built 6-story brick apartment building after block of these, in which tens of thousands of Romans were his renters. His first source of money. He also organized the first fire department in history and arguably the first insurance scam. The way his fire brigade would work is he had teams of slaves traveling around the city with wagons full of firefighting equipment. Now, you could pay a small amount of money to Crassus in advance, sort of insurance. So if your property caught on fire, Crassus's men would come and put the fire out. So, fire insurance. Now, if you did not pay insurance and your house caught on fire, or your apartment block, or your business, Crassus's men would show up to the fire and they would make you an offer. You could pay them a much larger sum of money on the spot and they would put out the fire. If you refused to pay, they wouldn't do a thing. They would stand back and watch your house or business burn to the ground. Then, once it had burned to the ground, they would offer you a deal. They would take the property off your hands at a much lower price than it would have been sold for earlier, helping Crassus build his empire within the city, because now he owns more and more land to put up more and more apartment buildings. I don't know whether he called them Crassus Towers, but perhaps. Anyway, what Crassus did believe was that because he was so rich, he must be incredibly intelligent and clever. Therefore, his decisions were the best decisions. He would be a great general. He also would go to the eastern Mediterranean and travel to eastern Syria with a Roman army. At the Battle of Carrhae, fighting against the Parthians, nomadic people who conquered Iran, he, along with most of his army, will be killed. Now, the third member of the triumvirate, though, is by far the best known. Caius Julius Caesar, or Julius Caesar as we usually call him. He was from one of the oldest and wealthiest Roman families, the Julii. They claimed direct descent from the goddess Venus. His branch of the family had the name Caesar because I believe it's his great-grandfather had been cut out of his mother's womb and survived in the first Caesarian section. hence the name for the operation. As a young man, he was someone seen to have a lot of talent and with a lot of potential future in leadership. Sulla, when he was in charge, perceived this and decided that he needed to have Julius Caesar killed. Julius Caesar is about 15 at the time. He began sleeping in a different bed every night because he was afraid of being caught by Sulla and killed. His family and friends convince him to leave Rome, and he heads towards Greece with the idea to complete his education. On his way, the ship he is in is attacked by pirates. He's captured. He says to the pirates, "You have made a terrible mistake. The best thing you can do is let me go. Otherwise, I'm not responsible for the consequences." They laugh. They think it's funny. They hold him for ransom. His family provides money to get him free, and he returns to Rome. 16 years old. He goes before the Senate. He's a very wealthy 16-year-old. He tells the Senate that if they will give him the authority, he will pay out of his own family money to build a fleet, which he will lead to defeat the pirates. The Senate sees this as a big deal. It's costing them nothing, and they may benefit with the pirates being cleared out of the Aegean Sea. Julius Caesar heads back. He defeats the pirates, and he finds those who had captured him, and he makes sure to stand and watch as they are executed, reminding them it did not have to be this way. He returns to Rome in triumph. He's at this point the youngest person to have led a triumphant Roman military expedition. He's named priest and chief bridge builder of Rome as Pontifex Maximus. Now, when the triumvirate gets underway, the three generals divide up the territories so that Pompey will watch the east, Caesar will go to the north, and Julius Caesar's assigned area is the Roman province of Gaul, which is southern France. From there, he finds himself dragged into war. As you can see on this map, all of that yellow territory is conquered by him. Most of modern France, Belgium, good bit of Switzerland, Western Germany, southern Netherlands are all pulled in one of the biggest single conquests by the Romans. If you ever take Latin, Julius Caesar's memoirs of this war are something you usually read in the second or third year, because they're written in such a clear, correct Latin style. This book, consisting of 8 books, Julius Caesar wrote one each year from the campaign front, sent it back to Italy, where it would be read aloud, saying what he and his army had done, glorified himself, and in a way that everyone could immediately grasp what he was saying. He led Roman armies even further into Germany and into southern Britain. Now, besides his own reputation, Julius Caesar does something else. Julius Caesar is not moved by money. He has a lot of money that he's inherited. He makes even more money as a general. But what he does with his money is he builds a political machine. Julius Caesar's soldiers know that back in Rome, Julius Caesar is watching out for their families, making sure their families are taken care of and will not suffer any financial hardship. If you are an ordinary Roman, you have a son, a brother, a husband who is in one of Caesar's legions, and any difficulty arises, you know you only need to approach Caesar's men, and they will help you out. Caesar sends money to help people, and Caesar develops a reputation as someone who is always willing to help. You know, if your house burned down and you did not have one of Crassus's policies, you need more money to build a new house, you approach Julius Caesar. He will make you a loan at no interest, repayable whenever. Through things like this, Caesar builds up an immense amount of popularity among ordinary Romans. He's considered their champion and their hero. He also funds gladiatorial games and other things for the ordinary people of Rome. And he begins to be seen as a problem by the Senate. The Senate sees how ordinary Romans trust Caesar. They look to Caesar's army as their champions, and they become worried. Now, in his wars in the north, Julius Caesar had exceeded his orders, and the Senate meets and decides that because he did more than he was supposed to and has refused to come in, he needs to stand trial for possible treason in the Senate. When Caesar gets this message, comes with a little other thing. He is supposed to disarm and come by himself to the Senate. And Caesar is not a fool. He knows he is put on trial, he will be found guilty and executed. So he decides he'll come to Rome, but he's not coming by himself. He's bringing his army. And Caesar, with thousands of troops, enters the territory that no Roman frontier army is supposed to enter in Italy. And when he does so, he crosses a small river called the Rubicon. In his own words, the die is cast, his chosen civil war. The Senate approaches the other leading Roman general, Pompey, and asks him to lead an army as their champion to stop Caesar. Well, doesn't go well for Pompey. Pompey is defeated and flees to Egypt. Caesar enters Rome. In Rome, with his army behind him, the Senate has a change of heart and votes to make him dictator, giving him unlimited power. Meanwhile, Caesar decides to track down and catch Pompey. He follows Pompey to Egypt. When he arrives in Egypt, he finds that Egypt is in the midst of a civil war between Ptolemy IX and his sister Cleopatra VII. And each of the two sides wishes to have the support of Caesar and his army. Pompey has been captured by King Ptolemy. King Ptolemy has Pompey decapitated and sends his head as a gift to Julius Caesar to welcome him to Egypt. Julius Caesar is somewhat insulted by this. Even though he was on his way to kill Pompey himself, he is quite upset that this Egyptian has killed a Roman who was once Caesar's friend. Meanwhile, Cleopatra sends a more interesting present to Julius Caesar in his camp. It is a carpet, and when the carpet is unrolled, inside the carpet is an Egyptian princess, Queen Cleopatra. Cleopatra who is 17 at the time, Caesar is in his early 50s. The two of them will form a romance. They will spend 18 months together in Egypt. Having defeated Ptolemy and settled Egyptian matters, Cleopatra, during this time, will have a son, who she names Caesar. Wonder who his father might be. Now, Caesar will head back towards Italy. On the way, he conquers the kingdom of Pontus, issuing the bulletin of Vini Vidi Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered, describing his campaign. When he gets back to Rome, he is declared dictator for life. As dictator for life, he reforms the Roman calendar, creating the Julian calendar and the month named after himself. He does other reforms of the Roman state. He has absolute power. And rumors reach Rome that in the eastern territories, he's begun to be worshipped as a god. Leading senators come together. They worry. Caesar is ending the Roman Republic. He's going to make himself king. And Rome needs to remain a republic. They form a conspiracy. One of them, the conspirators, is a senator named Brutus. Brutus, interestingly, was the son of a woman with whom Julius Caesar had an affair a number of years before. In fact, about a year to 6 months before Brutus was born. Julius Caesar has always wondered whether Brutus might be his son and has always tried to help him advance through his life, do anything to assist him. So, when Brutus joins the conspiracy, things explode with Caesar. And on the morning of March 15, 44 BC, also known as the Ides of March, Julius Caesar is warned not to go to the Senate to speak. His wife, he's had a wife all this time, tells him if he goes, he should take his soldiers with him. Says, if I take my soldiers with me, the senators will think I fear them. He said, wear your armor. Says, again, if I wear my armor, they'll know I'm afraid of them. So he goes unarmored and without guards into the Senate, where the group of senators attack him with knives, stabbing him repeatedly. And his last words are et tu, Brute, you too, Brutus, as he sees Brutus stabbing him. Caesar's dead. And Caesar's will is now read by Caesar's chief lieutenant, Mark Antony. Mark Antony wonders whether he, as Caesar's right-hand man, will be the heir to Caesar's power and political empire. Or if the child Cleopatra had with Caesar, Caesarion, will be the heir. Instead, as they read the will publicly, find something different. Caesar has named his 19-year-old grandnephew, Gaius Octavius, to be adopted him as his son and heir to all of his estates and political positions. Gaius Octavius is a student. He's found, told your great uncle has died, and you have been named his son and heir. You need to come back to Rome. Gaius Octavius changes his name. He becomes Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus Filius Divi, the last being son of the god. And he tries to take over Caesar's movement. Of course, he's 19. And Mark Antony, who is the man on the spot, will see him as, okay, he has the family name, but I'm the real leader. And the two of them will chase down the men who killed Julius Caesar. They will fall out, as Octavian is not interested in cooperating with Mark Antony. Mark Antony is not interested in simply being number two. Octavian has built a base among Julius Caesar's troops. He goes around to each unit of the army and says, oh, you're the third cohort of the 7th Legion. Wow, it's such an honor to be here with you. My father, Julius Caesar the God, always said if it ever came down to it, you are the group who he'd like to have around him in the last moment. And if only you had been there in the Senate, we know he would never have done. And he does this to each unit, building up their trust and love for him. So eventually Mark Antony is somewhat pushed aside. But they divide the Roman world, just as had happened earlier. And Mark Antony heads to the eastern part of the empire to organize and control it. When he gets there, he meets a woman. He met her earlier when he had been Caesar's sidekick, and maybe they had a spark. Now, though, a romance begins between them. Her name, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. They will have 2 children who survive. Curiously, according to one theory, those 2 children are the common ancestors of almost everyone in Africa, Europe, and the western half of Asia. Now, they also hope to establish Egypt as the center of empire for their children to rule, a fusion of Roman and Egyptian power. That's Cleopatra there. Maybe not quite as beautiful as perhaps we'd imagine. That's Mark Antony. They lead a fleet to wrest control of the Roman Empire, of the Roman territory from Octavian. The 2 navies meet at a place called Actium off the western coast of Greece. Octavian completely defeats them. Antony is killed in battle. Cleopatra realizes she's going to be captured and has herself bitten by a poisonous snake rather than being Octavian's prisoner. It's the end of the Roman civil wars. One man has won. It is the end of the Egyptian kingdom. Octavian has won. In the aftermath of the defeat, Octavian will be named as Pharaoh of Egypt. He will go back to Rome, and having finally ended all conflicts among the Romans, he can do what he wants. The Senate asks him if he would like to be dictator for life, if he would like to be a king. And he says, no, I'm not interested in fancy titles. I'm changing my name from Octavian to Augustus Caesar. And in terms of titles, there are only 2 titles I want. I'll remain Imperator, which means Commander-in-Chief of the Roman military. And a new title, I would like to be called Princeps, First Citizen. Don't ask for any special title, no elaborate ceremonies. All I want is to be the first person who speaks when the Senate meets. When it meets for its annual meeting, let me speak first. Nothing else, that's all I need. Senate's very relieved. They give him this title, these powers, thinking now they will be back in control. Doesn't work out like that. When he goes to speak in the Senate, he goes in on the first day and says, these are the laws you'll pass, these are the things you will do, peace treaties you will make, and this is all that you will do, and if you vote against any of these, you will not be around very long. And then the Senate does what he tells them. The Roman Republic is dead. The Roman Empire has begun.